So, Doctor, I want to ask you, what is transgenerational trauma?
Yeah. So transgenerational trauma is basically trauma that is passed down from generation to generation. And so I had explained earlier about, slavery was a very traumatic process, right? It was very violent. Black people were forcefully brought here and forced into slavery. And based on those traumas that we experienced during slavery, some of those same behaviors, the attitudes, the belief systems that we adopted as slaves can be passed down to generations after that. And that is why we see like the hypervigilance related to authority figures, or when we see the police, like we're on edge, right? So those are products of transgenerational trauma.
So that's just passed down genetically?
Absolutely. It can definitely be passed down genetically. I think it's important to note that anytime the body goes through some sort of stress response, our fight or flight system is activated. And when this fight or flight system is activated, different parts of the brain, different parts of the endocrine system, and all these different systems in the body can release hormones in excessive amounts, right? And so think about when these hormones and these different systems in the bodies are activated via slavery, and we're continuing to pass that same type of trauma down from generation to generation. So that means we're having generations of this type of trauma that's kind of like embedded into our bodies. So it can definitely be transgenerational in terms of our physiology. There are actually studies related to epigenetics that shows how trauma can be passed down from a physiological level.
So what kind of symptoms would that be, or how would that manifest itself? Would it be, high blood pressure, anger
Absolutely.
issues,
So
issues? What kind of?
Yes, absolutely. So there are different categories. It can be emotions, it can be behaviorally, it can be physiologically. So you hit the nail on the head when you talked about high blood pressure, significant stressors. In addition to that, feeling increased anger, feeling angry about feeling invalidated, feeling like you're not being heard, right? So these are emotions that can be directly related to transgenerational trauma. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Also, there are different mindsets that can be passed down transgenerationally, right? So when we're thinking about trauma, one of the mindsets that can be passed down is having a foreshortened sense of the future. So what that means is individuals who may not be able to kind of see themselves past the right now. I'm not able to see myself past the next 5 years, right? That's why sometimes when you ask somebody, like, what do you want to be when they grow up? They might say, I just want to be alive. Like that's a product of transgenerational trauma, not being able to see yourself beyond that specific point.
And then that I could see how that would tie into reckless behavior and not thinking long term. And some of the things that people say, oh, Black people do this, that, and the other, that are stereotypes. But that makes sense why we would behave and do certain things that we do. Fellas, how do you feel about what she's saying? Is any of this hitting home?
I'm just shutting up and listening. I'm learning so much.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, right? I'm just listening. She's hitting it right on the nail.
This is great. I love it. I learned a lot.
Doctor, could this be a reason why, we're so disconnected? Our culture is so disconnected. The trauma.
Yeah, it definitely can. It could be, yes. So trauma can definitely disconnect you from community, not feeling as though you can connect with other individuals within your community. So that's another impact of trauma, right? So in slavery, when families were separated, having to function without your mom around and your dad around, that's one of the products of slavery, of transgenerational trauma, feeling like you're not able to collectively connect with other individuals interpersonally, and even finding those negative coping skills. So basically coping skills are strategies or skills, methods that you utilize in order to help yourself feel better. And so when we are experiencing like these negative thought patterns and these significant emotions related to transgenerational trauma, if we're not taught proper ways to cope, then we can definitely go to, substance abuse or utilizing sex as a coping skill, all these different negative coping strategies that we can utilize as opposed to finding healthier ways of managing some of these traumatic responses that we might be experiencing.
Doesn't that just make sense with how we are in relationships sometimes? Like the over-sexualizing of Black women and men, and there's all this whole thing about commitment when you're ripped away from your family and you're forced to breed, and all this nonsense that they did with us and tearing the families apart. I can see how that would manifest in our DNA.
100%.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. We know we have it. So how can we treat this trauma?
Yeah. So I definitely commend individuals like you, Claudia, for giving us the space to be able to talk about this stuff. Other figures in the media who are really making it known that race-based trauma is real, such as like individuals like Taraji P. Henson and Charlemagne the God, people who are able to stand up and talk about these issues, because I think now that we're getting clarity on what we are experiencing, we're able to heal. I think it's so important for us to be very intentional about our healing, because dismantling white supremacy is exhausting. So we have to make sure that we're doing things intentionally in order to make sure that we are coping with this. So one of the strategies that I definitely suggest for individuals who are trying to cope with some of this transgenerational or race-based trauma is to, don't be afraid to take social media breaks. There might be times where you might feel like, if I'm not on Instagram or if I'm not on Twitter, I'll miss something. However, it can be very detrimental to just mindlessly scroll on social media without really taking into consideration what you're feeding your mind, what you're feeding your thoughts. And so giving yourself that break from social media will allow you to regroup and just to take a break from some of those racial cues that we might be seeing. Additionally, so I talked about being a person of faith. So faith-based coping strategies are definitely something that have been proven to be helpful through research. If you even think back to, civil rights and even slavery, that's how our ancestors got through, by, listening to music that uplifted the spirit, because individuals of the African diaspora, we're spiritual by nature. So utilizing those faith-based coping strategies can be very helpful with reducing some of those physiological symptoms that we might be experiencing. I also would encourage everybody to just go to therapy. I know I keep, saying that over and over again through this sitcom, this episode, but I think it's so important for us to really just take some time and process how we're feeling, because at the end of the day, like I said before, it's exhausting, fighting racism, it's exhausting fighting white supremacy, and we have to be very intentional about our healing. And what better way to be intentional about it than to sit down with a professional so that you can unpack your emotions, develop a healthy sense of racial identity, and to really talk about some of the experiences that you have had. So
you are spitting. I just want to sit back. I want to sit back and hear you talk. I'm like,
I'm just listening right now. I'm loving
I'm
it.
just like, okay, well,
More.
more.
But